And I'm Koen, and this talk is about Framer. And we try to translate at least this part into Russian, so I hope it's correct, because to be honest, I have no idea. But it's supposed to say design everything, because that's what Framer is. Framer is an interactive design tool, a tool that doesn't only allow you to do visual design, but allows you to put your visual design into true interactive prototypes. And that's pretty important. So let's start with a little bit about me, where we're coming from. First of all, I wanted to say that I'm truly happy to be in Moscow, here in Russia. Most of these, As a startup, and especially with a ton of clients in design, we're mostly focused on Silicon Valley and San Francisco. So if we do these talks, they're mostly in the Bay Area or in New York, but we ourselves are from Amsterdam in Western Europe, so we know that not all the best work is coming just from Silicon Valley, right? There's tons of really cool stuff coming from Russia, from Western Europe, from Australia. So we think it's important to visit and go around and talk to and experience how other designers around the world are making really great stuff, because I think we need a little bit more of that and maybe a little bit less of just Silicon Valley stuff. So a little bit about me. I'm a product designer. I started a software design company when I was around 20 years old, and it was called Sofa, also back in Amsterdam. We made applications for the Mac, and we were the technical stuff was okay. Maybe you've used some of these applications. One was called Versions, it was a Subversion application. And the other one was called Kaleidoscope, which is an application to compare differences, more for engineers than designers. And we had like a little storefront application called Checkout. But the thing that we noticed that we really liked to build was good interaction design. So we won 2 Apple Design Awards for some of the work. And we thought, hey, this might work out. This could be like our thing. We're pretty good at this. And in 2011, Facebook approached us, and we sold the company to Facebook, where then I worked with all of the employees as product designers. Well, most of them product designers, some were engineers. And I was a product designer at Facebook for 2 years, where I mostly worked on messaging and a little bit on video ads. So that's sort of the background. And I think while we were working at Facebook, one of the things that we started to notice around 2 years ago is that it was more and more important to not just show the visual part of your design, but show the actual interactive part of your design. So it kind of started to exist there, where we started thinking about this problem as a whole. And it basically, our entire product comes down to this sentence. This is sort of what we started to believe. We think that whereas for maybe 10 or 15 years, we've been mostly designing visual. So we've been doing a lot of Photoshop, a lot of Sketch, but more and more, if you think about mobile applications, then it's not so much about how it looks, it's also very much about how it feels, right? If you tap on something, how will it transition to the next screen? How will colors animate? How will things respond to multiple touches and all these things? And they're getting more and more important, and it's something that we've been okay with for a long time to basically not design. And you guys are all designers, so I think you can also sense that, especially over the last 2 years, it's became more and more important to actually do that part of the design as well, to design how it feels, not just how it looks. But I also often run into a lot of designers that are still thinking about, should I really prototype? Should I really do the interactive design? Photoshop and Sketch is good enough for me. So I want to address that for a little bit. And the reasons why you should prototype are basically twofold. There's like an external part, the part where you talk about your ideas, but also the internal part, the part where you discover new ideas. And to illustrate that, I have a little exercise. So if I start a new design idea or a new project, and I talk with my project manager or with my product manager or to other designers, it mostly starts in words when I get an idea, right? So I describe this problem, and I want to solve something with a draggable table view, and it should animate in and out. So the words are the first step, and then quickly I maybe make a sketch. And the sketch gives a little bit better example of what I'm about to do, right? So it has a little bit higher fidelity. But even if I'm working with people that are really good product designers, the image that they will have in their head could be very different from what I'm imagining, because it's only a part of the design. So a next step could be that I go to Sketch and I actually apply some shading, and I think about the visual style. And this gives a little bit more feedback on my ID. So there's definitely some shading going on, like some drop shadows. The layers should be numbers. But the most important part about this interactive ID is something we can't really talk about because it's not there. So it only becomes clear the moment that I build an actual prototype. I implement this. And now we're really sure that the thing that we're talking about is the exact same thing, right? Because you see that, like, if I tap on one of these, they sort of elevate from the background with a drop shadow. There's like specific styling. It responds with a nice animation. And now, if I'm talking to somebody about my ID, I'm really sure we're talking about the same thing. And that's like just a way more efficient way of working as a designer, and just making sure that you're thinking about the same. So the second big reason to prototype is for yourself. Framer, the way that we set it up, is a very flexible tool. We believe that you should, of course, there's a lot of work that designers do that's pretty repetitive. So sometimes you just implement already existing patterns. But the truly best part of our work is that you sometimes get to invent new IDs. And inventing stuff as a designer happens on the weirdest times. So sometimes you invent something under the shower because you just have an idea, you have some time to think. But for me, most of the time, I invent new stuff while I'm working on something. So if I'm designing one thing, I get a new ID because I'm implementing it. And that is a very powerful thing to have as a designer. So a combination of a tool that's very flexible and a tool that lets you design things where you can discover new IDs while you are designing, that is the thing that we're trying to build. And if we say flexible in discovering new things, then I'm, for example, talking about gestures. So if you're playing with this gesture transition, then you might get an idea, hey, maybe the transition should not animate from the left to the right, but the other way around, or maybe there should be some depth. And you can live play with these things and have the real transitions on your phone. So you play around, you discover new things. The same goes for multi-touch. It's really hard in an application of Photoshop or Sketch to imagine how multi-touch would work. You truly have to try it out on your device. And while you try this out, you get to invent something new, maybe. And another cool new thing is, for example, 3D touch. I think the latest iPhones have a very basic implementation of 3D touch, and we'll probably see some more interesting applications for it in the future. But if you start to design for these things, you want to play with it so you can better imagine what you can actually do with it and actually build for it. So our solution is Framer. And going back to the ID that we had at Facebook for this was pretty simple. We were working with a bunch of very talented product designers, and most of us were doing the day-to-day stuff in Photoshop and Sketch. And it meant that if we were having a presentation for maybe a vice president or maybe even for Mark himself, we would show him a bunch of tabs and we would say, well, Mark, if you click on this button now, then you'll see, and then we switch the tabs and then you'll see this. And a few of us started to do it differently. A few of us started to do it prototyping on the mobile phone, sometimes with Xcode, sometimes with Quartz Composer. And they actually handed over the phone. And that made a huge difference. So it started with a small group within Facebook where we started actually designing the actual app, prototyping the app, and we started developing these IDs for how we could do it more efficiently. And one of the IDs that some of the guys had is they came up with Quartz Composer and Origami, but I wasn't really into the Noodle-based interfaces, so I started developing a small JavaScript framework. And now, a JavaScript framework by itself isn't really worth much because everybody has a JavaScript framework. So what we try to do from there is build an application around it, because it's not so much just a little framework that you can use, but if you're a designer, you want an application that gives you live feedback about what you're doing. You want to see what you're doing. You want to have a truly great editor with really good autocomplete so you can learn it really quickly, avoid mistakes. You want to be able to preview it on many different devices. You want to get started right away, not have to set up a browser, a server, some auto refresh stuff. You just want to get your ID right out there. And of course, integrate with your favorite tools like Sketch or Photoshop. So this is how we started to invent Framer. So if we take a quick look at how Framer works, it's pretty simple. There's a whole bunch of code on the left, and then on the right, you see the output of your actual code, so your prototype. And in the middle, we have a layer panel, and the layer panel gives you an overview of what you can do. So on the right side is interactive, so you can play around with your actual prototype at any point and change stuff and see it reflected right away. So because everything is so dynamic, if I now update in color, it's a variable, and you'll see that everything will update from the background to the toolbar and all these things, while everything still continues to work. The same goes, for example, for the toolbar height. You can just change it back, see the result right away, see if it's better, if it's less good, and see it in the different states of your app. But what's really cool is that we don't only have code, we also have a direct manipulation. So if you're starting to edit these, you can, for example, change the colors, and you'll notice it writes the code for you, but also updates your prototype at the same time. And I'll show you a little bit more of this later, because I think this is what makes Framer truly special, the way that we mix code and direct manipulation. And when I'm talking about inventing new IDs, you can already tell that if you're playing around with this will get you new IDs, because you're just playing and you're discovering things that you might not have thought about that might be really good. Now, this is a bad example because it's not getting any better, but you can imagine this. So, of course, you can always go back to the code and edit it, go back into the UI, edit it, and just see how it changes and see if you like it or not. So this brings us to a sensitive subject for designers, because we truly believe that code is the best tool that designers are not using. And in technology, especially if you're talking to engineers, of course, they know this. They've been using code for over 30 or 40 years, and it's solved every problem. Everything that we see on the internet is built with code, so it's one of the best tools that we have in technology. Now, how do we get that tool to be very useful for designers? And Framer is trying to do exactly this. There's a few things that I think help for us. So coding today is not the same as coding 15 years ago, where you had to do C++ or something very heavy. No, we have JavaScript. We have really good browser engines. We have very good virtual machines. So we can make an app that shows you the output of your code right away. The code itself has become a lot easier, right? So some JavaScript is doable. It's not like you have to do scary stuff like memory management. I'm still not saying that code is easy. It's going to take, not an afternoon, but a couple of afternoons for you to get through it. But it's definitely not as hard as it used to be. So I know that a lot of designers try to get into coding for a long time, tried, failed, and maybe are still somewhere in that position. And with Framer, I have seen tens of thousands of people that never coded before for their work to going through coding every day for their work within 3 to 4 weeks. So it's hard, but it's not that hard. And the opportunity for using this is that it's such a powerful tool that it won't make you 10% better, it will make you 10 times as good, because the new things that you can suddenly express, the way, the efficiency with which you can express IDs just goes up by a lot. Now, to go back to the idea of code, that we don't believe that code is the best for everything. So if you've ever been typing in coordinates to move something to the left or to the right, there's a better way to do it. It's called direct manipulation. So you want to sometimes pick an object up and just move it around the screen. And we believe that too. We think code is really great for some things, but not so good for other things. So the goal of Framer is to combine the two in a very sensible way. So in our latest release, we announced a feature called autocode. And allows you to insert items in your code, and we will write the code for you. So on the right side, you see a properties panel, and you can play around with all these properties. And you'll see that on the left side, the code actually gets generated for you, and you will, of course, see it completely on the right side as a preview. The same goes for if you edit things directly on the screen. So we allow you to edit one of these layers, move the position, set it up, edit the scale, edit the blur, any visual property basically, and we will correct the code for you. So it means that you will have a mode where if you need to do something visual, it's really fast in Framer because you can use direct manipulation. If you want to do something truly interactive or build a loop, you can use code. So you'll have the best of both tools. The most typical way to start a Framer project is by starting in Sketch, to be honest, because you need a bunch of resources that you then want to make interactive. So a typical way, we fully integrate with Sketch, so a typical way is to have a Sketch file, import it into Framer, takes less than a second, and then add interaction through code, and you can start playing around with it. One of the best things, though, is that you can now go back to Sketch, if you like, change something in Sketch, and re-import it in Framer, and everything will continue to work. So it gives you a really great way to go back and forth between your visual tool and the interactive tool, and explore many different IDs with different versions. So the type of work that people make with Framer, and this is always my favorite stuff to talk about, because people are making beautiful things, it really varies. So typically what we see a lot, of course, is animation, because it's getting more and more important for every UI. A lot of touch, of course, because working with advanced gestures can really feel natural if you apply it in a very right way. Framer is also good in 3D and depth, so one of the coolest things that I saw lately was the Apple TV sort of 2.5 3D settings icon that you have are very good to make in Framer as well. But some of the best things are, because Framer lives in the browser and it's based on JavaScript, you can work with real input and live data. And it's very important to use all these different images that are not perfect images from your photographer designer friends, or use all these weird names that are not American names, and try them out and see them in your actual design before you can test your design and know whether it's good. So we have a gallery page on the Framer site. All these prototypes are up there, and a lot more, so you can check them all out. I wanted to highlight 2 specific prototypes of work that has recently been built in Framer, just because I think it's pretty great work. The first one is Facebook Live video. So one of our best Framerers called George Kiedenberg built this feature at Facebook. And you can already tell that there's a whole bunch of cool stuff going on. So the idea behind the product is that you at any point can broadcast live video to your Facebook page or your Facebook group. And a whole group of people can tune in and respond to you. So the text on the bottom are responses about your broadcast, but they can also send reactions, and the reactions have this cool effect where they sort of swipe through the screen, so you can see how many people love or don't like your broadcast. Another really cool part about the Framer prototype specifically in Facebook is that they actually use this for user testing. So they used it with real data. So if they had somebody coming in, they just hooked their Facebook ID up to the prototype, and they would see their own friends and their own reactions. So it was a really great way to test it to user testing before they actually engineered and built the whole thing. This is all just work done by designers. Another really cool thing that launched last week, which was built by Min Sung at Google, is the Gboard. And I'm not sure if it's already available in Russia because it's not in the Netherlands. I think maybe only in the United States. But I think it's a really smart product. It has a keyboard where you can search for anything really. and then include the result into any application. So it's handy if you, for example, want to send a restaurant location to a friend. It's completely prototyped in Framer, so you can see that there's like a little pager view in the bottom. You can go in and out to the next view. It's really cool. We'll place this one online tomorrow. You guys can all check it out. And this is actually from the designer that built this thing, so it's also really fun to learn how they do stuff. Now, if we're talking about all the different things that you can make with the tool, or the things that design tools should make, we're mostly talking about interaction or animation or kind of the simpler stuff still. But one of the things that I always like to talk about is that I think design is going to change faster and faster even. And I want to do a little test here in this audience. Can I maybe see some hands for people that are designing for virtual reality today? Anyone? I see about 3 hands going up. Yes. I think this is pretty typical. This is a room full of designers, and we've had 7 types of VR glasses shipping this year, and nobody is designing for VR. Well, I'm not going to buy one of these glasses because the experiences must be terrible. And it's a pretty typical thing, like we're trying to figure out how to do good interaction and animation, but the VR goggles are already here, and there's a lot more stuff coming. So one of the things we built right into Framer is a VR module, which means that it's by no means as good as Unity or some of the Unreal tools, but it allows you to draw a simple 3D environment and put your UI into it and respond to people looking at your UI or people pointing at it. So you can make a game with it. We've seen some really cool prototypes of a 3D pizza ordering interface. And it's a way to start exploring as a designer how to think in 3D, because it's a whole different mindset. We think that Framer is very important to figure out these next steps in design, and that's something we're really committed to figuring out. Because if you think about the future, it's not really hard to predict where we're going. We're going to have not only virtual reality that we need to design for pretty soon, but we're going to have artificial intelligence. And I can't even explain you how the design for that's going to work. We have to figure that out pretty quickly, though, because there's a lot of AI in development, and we'll see some of the first really good AI apps popping up soon. Internet of Things is another thing that we'll have to start working on and start designing for, because we have great technology, but if it's not designed, it's not going to find the adoption as fast as it should be. So this is our big bet. I think, whereas today as a designer, we're still struggling with the fact, should I go from purely visual to interactive? What's actually happening is that we need to go from interactive to VR, Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence. And we better need to hurry up, because otherwise all these things are going to have really bad designs. Going back to Framer today, though, one of the hardest things if you're trying to learn something new is if you get stuck and you have nobody to ask how to get further. And for coding, this can be truly terrible, because a simple typo can get you stuck and you don't really know how to solve it. So we built this great community online. It's a Facebook group. There's around 15,000 people sharing their work, helping each other out, talking about new design tools, talking about tools and design in general. And I invite everybody, any one of you to join. It's an English spoken group. There's also, I know, a specific Russian Framer group, but I'd still love to invite all of you here, because there's a few English-speaking people there that are like American, but most of them aren't. They're like me, English are second language, so really friendly. If you need some help, or like you can only explain it to a point where you think it brings across the point, just do it, we'll help you out. We're kind of used to that. And we also have a great resources page. So one of the things that we learned over the last 1.5 years is that people learn in very different ways. Some people like to learn by just looking at another prototype and copying, pasting until they run into a problem and figuring it out at that point. And some other people just like to study up front. So they want to do a full video course, or maybe buy a book and study it on a holiday and then come back and then dive deep into it. So we have all these different articles, tutorials, but also whole full courses through video on Udemy. to get started. So if I convince you to try it out, then start here and figure out the one resource that you like really good and take it away. And with that, I thank you very much, and I hope you all try out Framer. And I think we'll take some questions.
Hey, Koen, thank you so much. It's absolutely brilliant.
Thank
Can
you.
you please talk a bit about your roadmap? Because I have a feeling that you're pretty open about it, and specifically about more complex projects done in Framer.
Sorry, it's really hard to hear you.
Better now?
Maybe if
No?
I stand a little bit closer to the speaker.
Okay, so could you please talk more about your roadmap?
Yes.
I don't know,
Anything specific that you'd like to talk about?
bigger projects.
Bigger
More
project.
complex projects.
Yes. Because you're a framer and you make really big prototypes.
Yep.
Okay. Yes, I have a good answer for that because so the question is, we have some really advanced framer users already, and the prototypes tend to get really large at some point. And it's really hard to organize your code in Framer today. So typical engineers use multiple files, but Framer has the limitation of just one file today. But we will I can't really, it's still software, so I'm not sure how many weeks it still has to take, but we're really close to a big release where we introduce a way to organize your code a whole lot better. It's not going to be multiple files. You'll see. You can actually download the beta today if you want to have a sneak peek and play around with it. There are going to be some crashes and bugs if you use the beta, but it will solve a lot of your problems, and we hope to have it done in a couple of weeks and get it in your hands.
Hi.
Hey.
Thanks for coming.
Yes.
What about web applications and websites? Will Framer support it?
Yes, we actually already do, but I think we are doing a really bad job at communicating it, and I was realizing myself tonight again, if we show all the examples, it's basically all phones, but Framer is really good for desktop prototyping. Framer is really good for web prototyping. It's just that in the marketing, we always show a phone, so you don't really think about it. But the best example, of course, is that I prototype Framer completely in Framer, so because I have to. And it's a really good way to build desktop stuff and try it out. So there's no reason. I think we're actually the best prototyping tool on the market for desktop. So I'd urge you to try it out. You'll like it a lot.
Hi.
Hey.
First of all, I want to thank you for coming to Russia.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is, recently you rolled out a big update to Framer.
Yes.
Featuring autocode and new visual instruments. Does that mean that you're going to focus more on visual part of interface and bringing new visual instruments to Framer?
Yes, but I think from the update or the way that we presented the visual instruments, I like that name by the way, you can tell that we want to figure out the best way to combine code and direct manipulation. So we truly believe that code is a really great way to express many things, but we want to figure out a balance to mix it with visual manipulation of stuff. And I think the autocode that we've introduced a couple of weeks ago is only the first step. I think there's a lot more that you can do, where a visual UI makes more sense than typing it up in code. And we're definitely going to explore that a whole lot further. Next up, by the way, I can be pretty open. Next up is animations. So you can probably imagine that figuring out an animation and see what the bounciness should be, that would be a really good visual interface rather than having to type it in. So that's what we'll be focusing on.
Hey. The great thing about web technology is that you have 3 separate entities. Like you have markup, you have styles, and you have behavior. I might be wrong here, but as far as I got your presentation in Framer, you have this all combined in one place. So I have two parts to my question. Whether I'm correct on that, and why have you decided to go with that decision? Doesn't that lead to, well, messy code that has everything in it, like, mixed?
Yes, I fully understand your question. So to repeat, with HTML, you're used to having a very clear separation between styling and CSS, the script in JavaScript, and the markup in HTML. And Framer only has one language. It's JavaScript, basically. And you have to do everything in JavaScript. So everything just lives in one language. So I get the question, and I hear this a lot. The thing, though, that you're noticing on the internet is that many people are actually re-evaluating these IDs if that separation is indeed the best kind of separation. So if you want to go a little bit more technical, for example, you can see in the React community that they're trying to figure out if CSS isn't better expressed in JavaScript as well. So you can combine it with the module that uses it, and you can avoid leaking to the global scope and having messy errors. So I think we're going to see more and more things expressed in JavaScript. And I think that is a better way to do it, to have it all expressible in one language and you picking yourself how you want to make the separation, rather than having a separation with 3 different languages that's kind of like forced upon you. While that feels kind of clear, it doesn't provide a lot of flexibility to figure out new things. So I think in the end, a lot of these things will end up just being JavaScript.
Okay, thank you. Just a small question.
Sure.
Hence I have the microphone. Do you have relative positioning for elements, or do you need to go from like 0 every time? And do you plan to implement that so that all the elements would move if something has changed?
Yeah, so basically everything is sort of, if you want to think about Framer the way that you think about designing in the browser, everything has fixed positioning. But on top of that, we have a bunch of layout tools. So for example, you can tell really easily in Framer for a box to be in center. You don't have to think about like weird HTML tricks. It's just going to be there. You can place it in the top, left, right, bottom. What we don't have is a super advanced layout framework. So for example, you see the most popular layout framework, or the 2 most popular ones, are Flexbox, and the other one is it's basically one in Xcode, and it's called Auto Layout. But there's a whole larger technology behind it. And I think we'll adapt to a simpler version of one of those 2 to express layouts better, because I think there's a lot to innovate there. Because if I use any of those both, I always feel like it's not getting easier to understand how your layout will respond. It feels very powerful, but it doesn't feel simple for simple cases. So I think we're going to invest into making a little bit of a better layout framework that solves 80% of the cases really well and leaves the last 20% up to you. But I don't have anything today, so we're working on that.
Okay, thank you.
Please to the right.
Hi.
Hi. Your team, your talk, and your project are just awesome. Thank you for everything.
Thanks so much.
Not a question, but I kind of want to hear your opinion on one thing. While browsing your website, I found some prototypes that are just complicated, and they look like they're already ready to go to the production. And the thing is that I have to write a lot of CoffeeScript to make them work, and then I will have to pass everything to my developer, so that he will need to rewrite everything in native language, like Swift for iOS, for example. So won't it be easier for an average designer to learn Swift instead of CoffeeScript and write everything in Xcode and just not spend time?
Yes. I mean, in an ideal world, you are right. But that would also mean that in Swift you would be able to make a website and a Mac application, or you can actually in Swift, but an Android app. So that part, if there was one true language to build for every platform in a really high quality way, then I think Framer would look very different. But that said, I think we're focusing on something else with Framer. If you are in a phase where you are thinking about expressing IDs, then you do not want to think about browser compatibility or different platforms or animation performance. You just want to think about the ID itself. And I think for now, at least, Framer is really focused on optimizing for that part of the process, the part where you don't want to be limited by anything except for your own imagination of what you can express. I also see that we are in a really great position to get closer to production over time, because we are code and production is code. Bridging that is going to take a lot of effort, but will be a very interesting problem that we think a lot about. But this is not something that we'll have in a year or something. This is a way larger problem than that. And I'll add another thought that I always think when I think about these things. So let's say I want to solve that problem, and I build a framework with which you can run Framer code on any device. Then I basically built a multi-platform interface toolkit. And multi-platform interface toolkits historically never give you the best interfaces. They give you cheap interfaces on all platforms. And Framer is really targeted toward building the best interfaces. So I think that's a really tough part to solve. If you want to make something run on everything, you can never be the best on every platform. You're always going to be sort of the middle layer of every platform. And that's not really where I enjoy working, what I enjoy working on.
I see. Thank you. Enjoy time in Moscow.
Thanks. Yeah, I will.
First of all, thank you for a cool product. And my question is, can you tell a little about the process of coming across new ideas and how do you implement them in your final product and prove their value for creative specialists?
Wait a minute. Oh, there you are. Yeah, sorry, can you repeat your question? I was looking for you.
Can you tell a little about your pipeline for developing and adding new cool features for your product, and how do you prove their value for creative specialists?
Yes, so for us, I don't have a magic bullet answer to the question, because you can't really measure what's going to work on a large scale. If I invented that, I would be really rich. So what we do is we have a whole bunch of designer friends that we know very well and intimately. And we have a small group of these people that work at larger companies, and they're basically our advocates or our spies or our, I don't know, you can put many words on it, but we will give them features that we're thinking about, and they're pretty rough. They're just IDs at that point, and they're going to work with it and provide us really good feedback. But they can also pick some people within these companies that are working on problems that might really benefit from that solution, and they will let us know how well it works and give us feedback on that. So that's one part that works really well. If you are running a startup and you want to figure out what the right features are, then I wouldn't recommend focus groups or anything like that, but I would recommend building a core group of users, stay really close to them, and listen to them really well. Just make sure that they are in positions where you have to use your tool every day, and they're surrounded with your tool every day. Because if they're smart people, you're going to get a ton of great information from them. The other thing, but this is a pretty unique thing for Framer, is that people can build their own things in Framer. So we see a lot of modules that people build for Framer to, for example, solve a very specific problem for expressing flows, where you just take a bunch of images in Sketch and put them together. And if one of these modules becomes very popular, we can add it to the core. And we're an open source JavaScript framework, so we ask these people, hey, are you interested in making a pull request and being a contributor? And most often they are, because they get some good exposure from it, and we'll help them market it. And that's also how a lot of features end up in Framer that we actually haven't invented ourselves, but they're just great ideas from other people that wanted to contribute.
Sounds good. Thank you a lot.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hey.
I got a question. You know that Facebook announced a new version of their
Origami.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they invented some interesting component approach. And there is something that we can expect from Framer in your product. I mean, component approach.
I think Origami is a really good product. And I think the only reason or the only limitation to Origami until today was that it was built on Quartz Composer, and Quartz Composer was a really bad product because Apple doesn't have great reasons to support it anymore. So basically what Facebook did is rebuilding Quartz Composer internally, and this is their first version. But the way to look at Framer and Origami and compare them both is they're really similar in the sense that they both have no limitations to what you can do. Unlike other tools, for example, like InVision is very optimized to put screens together for a client so they can envision how a product works. And you can use it in 10 minutes, but you can't build anything with it. And Framer and Origami will let you build anything. But the way that you express it is either code in Framer or it's visual programming, and that's Origami. And I would try them both and pick the way to express that connects with your mind. Because I really like Origami, but noodle programming isn't how my brain works. And that's also what I saw in Facebook, where both tools are very much used. 50% of the people, they really enjoy thinking like that, and 50% of the people really enjoy thinking in code a lot more. And I think it's pretty great that we have two really good solutions for that.
The thing that I want to question,
Sure.
I want to ask you, is when you create a new, project in Framer, you build it from ground up,
Yes.
and sometimes it's not inventing some new tools, some new interactions, but often it's a basic animations, basic tools like action bars, like buttons.
Yes.
And can we expect something like components in Framer that will be pre-installed, predefined, and we may use them in our projects and not build everything from ground up?
Great, yeah. Sorry, I totally misunderstood your question.
Yeah, that's
and the answer is yes, but I can't really officially announce anything, but you might have seen that we've worked with Facebook before on a couple of things, and we might do that in the future again too. And there's so they have all these great open source designer resources. So if they decide to open up some of that stuff, it's going to be a no-brainer for us to add it to Framer. So we're really hoping they might do that. The other thing is that we have a whole bunch of component frameworks built by volunteers already. So that's, I think, a pretty decent solution. And ultimately, if we become big enough that we can spend, if I can find enough talent in Amsterdam and we sell enough copies, I'll gladly build you every component framework that you like, because I'd love to do it. It's just a matter of bandwidth.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks, guys, for Framer.
Yes.
I have a question. Do you think about AI, artificial intelligence, about Framer? So do you see it inside Framer? Or do you think about 10 years later, would the business of Framer feeling well when AI comes? Thanks.
Yeah, I think about it a lot, but I don't have a lot of answers yet, because I don't know what the most successful user-facing artificial intelligence apps are going to be. If I had to make a bet today, it's going to be chatbots. But we all know how bad humans are at predicting this stuff. So every 2 years, we try to predict what the next big platform is or what the next big app is going to be. And we almost always fail. So I think actually for that reason, it's probably going to be something different. And that makes it kind of hard to prepare for. And this sort of ties back into sort of the core belief that we have with building Framer, is that as long as we build a tool that allows you to build anything, we support it. So today, if you want to try artificial intelligence in your design, there's a great JavaScript framework called Synaptic. It's like a neural network that you can train, and you can work with image recognition, voice recognition, a whole ton of stuff that are the most promising AI technologies today, and you can use them in Framer tonight if you want. So I think if we continue to do that, then the moment that something really popular will emerge, we can optimize for that case. That's sort of our tactic.
Thank you. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
You are now working with Silverflows, yeah?
Sorry?
Silverflows, you are working with it. Yeah?
No, they work with InVision. So
And you are, I saw on their website that you work with it. And I want to ask you, what the difference between is there any difference between the framer and the Silverflows except the code part?
yeah, I think Silverflows optimizes very much for doing simpler things for interactive design. So the biggest use case for interaction design today is putting screens together and having basic transitions between them. And it's a very common use case for designers, like big advertising agencies have to do it all day long. I bet most of your work, you run into cases where you have to put a few screens together. And if you know that you only have to do that, then you can optimize a UI for it and build like a really nice interface for it. And that's what Silverflows is doing. And that's also what InVision is doing. So I think the difference between them is like they're really good at one thing, and they're really easy to learn. So they trade flexibility for a learning curve. To be honest, I haven't used it because I don't think it's out yet. So it's my best answer without ever having used it. So take it with a grain of salt.
Thank you. So it was the last one because it was so. Thank you, Koen.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Can you remind two of the best questions, and we can present books to those people if you remember two questions?
I always loved the question about like how do you get to production. Came from that corner, and I think the other one. Which one did you think was really good?
Who was the first one?
Oh, there's a next question there.
Yeah. So we'll ask somebody to tell us who was the first one to ask a question.
Yeah, or actually, I always like talking about the future roadmap as well. So the question that came from here with like the visual aid and how we're going to do that,
Yeah,
we can
cool,
do that.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you, Koen.
Thank you so much. And we'll be hanging around, so if you have more questions, just come and grab me.